everybody, it's me, Mrs. Carter. Today, we're going to do a special project by request. We are going to create a landscape. So a landscape is a picture of outside in nature, a picture of the land, right? So if I were to paint a picture of the city, I would call that a cityscape. And if I were to paint a picture of the ocean, I would call it a seascape. But because we're going to be painting a picture of outside the land, we call it a landscape. And today we're going to be inspired by a famous artist named Grant Wood. I have a slideshow below this video of some of Grant Wood's artwork and some information on him. Today, let's look at an example that I started, I didn't finish it quite yet, of a landscape. So my paper is long. That is a great size for a landscape where it goes across horizontal. And this line right here is called the horizon line. That's where the sky meets the ground. So we're going to talk about the horizon line when I show you how to draw your landscape. And we're going to talk about three other words that are really important. It's called foreground, middle ground, and background. That's when we're talking about space, and I don't mean outer space. I'm talking about the space between objects. So when things are really close to you, they're bigger. Let me show you what I mean. If I get close to you, I'm bigger. And then the farther away I get, the smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller I get. Look how tiny I am compared to how much closer I got to you. So when things are closer to you, they appear bigger, and that's called the foreground. You can take your hand and put it very close to your face and it looks huge, right? Look how big that looks. But then as I pull my hand farther away, I can see that it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Try it. Put your hand really close and then pull your hand away and you'll see how it gets smaller. So when it's really close to you, it's in the foreground. It's the closest thing to you. Say that word with me, foreground. When it gets really far away and it's tiny, 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 like if you were in an airplane and you look down, the cars look like tiny little ants, or if you're seeing somebody from far away, if they're walking far away, they look really small, that's the background. But in between that space is called the middle ground. So do it with me. Foreground, middle ground, background, and move your hand far away so it looks smaller. Foreground, middle ground, background. So we're going to create the illusion of space by drawing things that are big in the bottom and really small far away near the horizon line. And then medium-sized things like trees and houses in the middle ground. So I'm going to turn you down and show you how to start your landscapes. Hi everybody, here's my piece of paper and my landscape example. Now you can see my landscape example is long, it's that horizontal paper, but it's not as wide. So I'm gonna take my ruler and make my paper more landscape feeling. So you might have a traditional size paper, I want you to put it the long way. Take your ruler or another piece of paper and I want you to go across and make your paper shorter. Now to make sure it's even on both sides, you always want to measure from the top. So I went right here, now I'm going to come over here to this side and make sure that it was the same. As you can see, mine was only a hair off. And then I can put my ruler back and draw my line across. So have you ever heard the saying, measure twice, cut once? That's because it's easy to do it wrong. So you want to measure that out and make sure that it's equal from the top down and go all the way across. And if you need help with that, you can ask a family member to help you measure that out properly, but give it a try yourself. Now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut my paper because I'm going for that long landscape. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut my paper for that nice long horizontal landscape vibe. And now I have a longer piece of paper. So the first thing I want to do is I want to draw in my horizon line. Now it does not have to be a straight line. So feel free to just make a curved line, right? So if I put my horizon line down really low here, I would have a lot of sky and I wouldn't have as much room to draw my foreground, middle ground, and background. So I highly recommend you draw your your horizon line a little bit higher so you have lots of room for your landscape to draw objects. You can also draw, like I did here, a little bump for a mountain, but I just did a curved line. And I can come over here and draw another bump that falls right off the edge of the page. That makes it look a little bit more interesting. Anything that falls off the edge of the page always makes our artwork look a little bit more interesting. And now I want to draw a line like diagonal going slanted like this. And then when I pull my line, I'm going to pull it a wave. And this one is going to follow along, but get a little wider and a little wider and a little wider like a river. And you can see that I've created background, middle ground, and foreground because it's really big right there. Now I'm going to follow these lines like I created here with the land. You can see I made a pattern. Grant Wood does that often in his artwork. So I'm going to make some lines that are patterns in the land. As you can see, I'm going to keep going. And it's very small, and then it gets wider and wider. So it's small, and then it gets wider and wider. And if I make a mistake, it's easy for me to make it better by erasing something. So draw nice and light in case I make that mistake. So now these lines don't work anymore because I made a mistake. Do I sweat my mistakes? No way. That's why we have an eraser. So at the top, I'm really, really close and narrow. It's very close, and then I get wider and wider and wider. And I'm gonna keep doing that. Very close, wider and wider and wider. And I'm gonna keep going across. And you can see the closer I get, the smaller my little lines got. And now I can do the same thing over here. Really, really close. They're equal to each other. And then I'm gonna come farther and farther out by making these ones wider and these ones narrower. And here I put the two lines, they kind of met each other and made a cool pattern. That totally works. So now here's my land with all these patterns, and then here's my sky. So in my sky, I'm gonna put a sunset. So I'm gonna draw a curved line right here, and I'm gonna draw these broken lines. They start and stop going around and around. So this isn't my sun, that's the mountaintop. So to make sure I make that staying looking like the mountain, I'm gonna add more lines to that as well, where they get really narrow at the top and they widen and get farther and farther as I come down. So this bump also looks like land. Where here, when I color this in, it will be yellow or yellow-orange like the sun. And I'm drawing these broken lines also in a pattern. So we're using a lot of pattern in our landscape inspired by our artist Grant Wood. Now it's time to add some objects like trees and houses, and I might need to erase some of these lines. That's perfectly fine because you know to draw nice and light, right? So here I'm going to draw a tree. So I'm going to draw that curved line and then another curved line. And to draw my tree, I'm going to draw a spiral and a spiral. So it goes around and around and around. And I'm going to change the sizes. There's many different ways to draw a tree. I want my tree to look really whimsical and fancy. So I'm drawing all these spirals. And you can see there's lines going through it still. So you might want to erase that section and then draw your spirals in. As you can see, Mrs. Carter makes a lot of mistakes. I don't worry about my mistakes. I just try my best and go over them. So here I'm drawing out, redrawing all those spirals. And now this is my foreground, my biggest tree. And now I'm going to draw some smaller trees in the background. So let me erase this area first and make sure that there's no lines there so I don't have to do as much erasing. And I'm going to draw those tiny spirals. And you can see there's a little line of the horizon line, and I erase that line in between so that my tree is on top of the line, not behind it. So now I'm going to add more little trees. And I'm going to keep going around and around. Little spirals. So here I have 3 trees, 2 in the background and 1 in the foreground. Let's get one in the middle ground. So I want to make sure it's not bigger than this one and it's not smaller than this one. And this section right here is going to be about where all my tree is. So I want to erase this. Now there's different kind of ways to draw a tree, right? So I'm going to try a different way for my middle ground. I'm just kind of drawing bumps inside. And here is my trunk that I'll color that in later. I can add little bits of grass right here if I want to make it a little bit fancier. And this looks like this would be a great place to add maybe water. So I could kind of put little bumps here, or I could do water lines. I think I'm going to go this way, like it's a river. And let's see, what else can I add? Here I had a house. So let me show you how I draw houses. So I'm going to put a little house far away, right by the tree. So right here, I'm going to draw a vertical line and a vertical line and come across to make a square. I'm going to draw that triangle roof, right? And now I'm going to come across horizontal, and leave this space diagonal and come back down. And this looks like a house or a barn. And I can add a little chimney, right? A vertical line, horizontal, and vertical. I'm going to color that in so you can see that chimney pop. I'm going to add a door and maybe some windows, little squares or rectangle shapes. So that one's far away. And maybe I'm going to add a little pathway here. Remember, when things are close to the door, they're really, really small, and as they come out, they widen. Remember what happens in space. Everything is farther away, it's smaller, and then it gets bigger and bigger. Even when it is in the background, there's still space in between these two objects, right? I'm going to stop here and go in fast speed so that you can see me add more to this. All right, now you can see I started tracing over every pencil line I created with a black crayon. And you want to make sure that you press down nice and dark to create your line, because we're going to put marker over this. And the marker is going to get turned into paint. We're going to try that effect again. Now, if you have watercolor paints at home, that's what I used here in this example. And you can use your watercolor paints again. That's awesome. But if you don't have watercolor paints, we'll use marker again. Now, if you don't have that as well, no worries. You can paint it with or color it in with any material you have. But don't forget, when you're tracing over with crayon, to really be watching what you're doing so that you don't draw through your tree or any of your details. You want to make sure that that is on top of any of those pattern lines that you drew before. So you want to go nice and slow and try to match up your line. Now, if you color anything in solid, that's awesome to do in small places, but that's where the marker or the paint will not stick because the crayon is there if you press down really, really dark. So we're pressing down nice and dark to create a crayon resist. Remember, that's when the pencil, or the crayon I should say, you go over it and the marker or the paint that you're using does not cover it. It pops right through. You can see right here, I painted all over this and the black crayon just came right through. I didn't have to worry about it covering the crayon. So here I'm gonna fill this all in. Let's finish this piece in fast motion. All right, here's my landscape all traced out in crayon, and now I'm going to start using my markers to color. I can also take crayons and color a little bit of things in with crayon and go over it with marker as well. That would continue my crayon resist. So I'm going to do my sun, where I just draw a few yellow lines, and then I'm going to take my water with my paintbrush and I'm going to go over it. Now my sun right now just turned a little bit green because I was painting a test and I didn't use clean water. So it's very important that you always use clean water when you're using your watercolors. But if you make a mistake, you can take a paper towel and you can pick it back up again and it will still work. Let me go clean my water out and come back. All right, let's try that again. So I'm going to add a little bit of marker lines. And now I'm going to make sure I have clean water, and I add a little bit to my paintbrush and I'm going to spread that out. And now I've turned my marker into paint. Next, I'm going to fill in my water. So to do my water, I'm going to use some blue, but I'm only going to put a few little lines because I want it to be really light blue. So the less marker I use, the lighter it's going to be. And here I added the water. So if I added more marker, it would get darker and darker. So here I'm really spreading it out for a nice light shade of blue. And as you can see, I'm spreading this out and I'm following the direction of the water going downward with my paintbrush. Now, if you have a little bit thicker paper at home, this might work better, but you can use any paper. And if it bubbles up on you when it dries, just lay a heavy book on top and it will re-flatten it out. Now I want some shades of green. I'm going to do a combination of light green and dark green, and I'm going to make a pattern like Grant Wood did. He did a lot of patterns. So I'm going to do dark green, skip it, dark green, skip, dark, skip, dark, skip, dark, skip, and dark. And make sure that goes all the way across. And now let me go ahead with my light green, my yellow green, in between the areas I didn't do. Now, if it's easier for you, you could always go back and forth between the two, totally up to you. And now I'm going to turn this into paint, and I'm going to do one at a time. So I'm going to draw this down. And wherever it bumps into the black crayon, that's okay because it's not really going to totally cover it. And I'm going to fill this all the way in. So you can see that area is done. Now I'm going to wash my brush because I'm working on a new color. But shades of green, if they blend together, it will still look really nice. And maybe you want to make that happen on purpose. Look how special it looks when some of that green bumps into that yellow green. That looks really cool. Now in watercolors, that's called a wet on wet technique. When a wet puddle of paint mixes with another wet puddle of paint. And you can kind of make that happen on purpose by adding a big puddle right there and letting it mix together. So I'm going to keep doing that. What I don't want to do is just go back and forth over this whole thing. If I'm trying to create that pattern, I want to do one little section of land at a time and then come back and add water to the next color and let the two kind of mix together. That's going to create that really cool wet on wet. It almost looks like tie-dye. See how that just happened? And I'm going to keep going across. I'm going to do the rest of the land in fast motion so you can see it happen a little bit quicker. All right, now you can see I've done all my patterns in the land, and now I'm going to move on to some other details. Oh no, this is land too. So I want to do the same thing. Do a little double take and make sure you didn't miss any other little steps, right? Any little mountains you did up top with that same pattern. So I'll go back and fill this in really quickly before I move on. And remember, when you're coloring this in, if they blend into each other, no big deal. It still looks really nice. That's kind of the cool effect with turning watercolor paint, or marker I should say, into watercolor paint. Watercolor paint does the same exact thing. Now I have all my land done, and now I'm going to do my trees. But oh no, I only have these 2 shades of green. You know what else I have? I have some teal and I have some black. So I'm going to mix my dark green, some black, and some teal to make my own special shade of green for the trees. So I'm going to add a little bit of regular green to my tree, a little bit of teal to my tree, and black makes everything darker. It's called a shade. It's not on the color wheel because it's not really a color. Black and white are not colors. Black is a shade and white is a tint. And this shade of black makes everything darker. So now let's just mix this all together. And remember, that black crayon pops right through because of that crayon resist. And here I have my own special shade of dark green for my trees. That looks really cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that to all of my trees now. Remember, it's regular green. You could make any shade you want with black to make it darker, and I'm gonna add that teal to it. So let's do this in fast motion so you can see the rest of my trees get filled in as well. Now here my landscape and trees are done, and I have some small details. Now I did my tiny trees, so if I paint right now, the colors might bleed together like they did here where they mixed. And I don't think I want that to happen. So I'm gonna let this dry before I move on, but let me fill in my little pathway here black. And I could just fill this in with just some black marker and leave it be. I'm gonna leave that house white. And maybe I want to go over some of my trees with my marker and fill in where the crayon didn't so that these look more like dark tree trunks. And I'm just going to touch up anything. And now I'm going to let this dry. And once this is dry, now I'm going to come back and do my sunset sky where I have my pinks and oranges and reds in the sky. So let yours dry and then come back. What if you don't have time to let it dry? Use a blow dryer. All right, my blow dryer worked, and now my picture is more dry. Now let's do my sunset. So a sunset, the sun is yellow, and then it kind of turns oranges and pinks and reds. And I have some of the traditional peach and orange color that I'm gonna add. So let me start with a few peach lines. And now a few orange lines. A few pink lines. I can do light pink. I can do dark pink. And I could even do a little bit of red. Now once I do red, that looks very close to dark pink. I kind of want to move to the purple color and then blue. But you're going to notice that your reds and your blues next to each other are going to mix purple together. So I do like peaches and oranges, pinks and reds, purples, and then my blue. Now I'm ready to paint. Now I want to start from here and go out. And I'm just going to go back and forth, side to side, and let some of the colors really blend together. And I can pull more of those oranges down. And if a color doesn't look so great, guess what? You can come back and add a little bit more of a color. You can leave it like that because that looks really cool, or you can add a little bit more water and blend it in a little bit more. Now I'm going to come in with my pinks. Ooh, wrap around my tree. So you can tell I'm not going to my purples yet because I don't want my purple to mix with my orange. That's going to make a shade of brown. So I'm staying in the order going across like a rainbow. Go very slow and careful around your trees because that green might mix Even if it's dry, it might mix, so just be careful. And now I'm gonna come over on this side. I'm not gonna jump over to these two yet, unless I wash my paintbrush. If I wash my paintbrush, I should be fine. And now I'm gonna do my purple. Drag it behind my trees. And my blue. So cool. Let me come over to this side. I'm gonna pull my purple and then my blue. And as you can see, I made a beautiful sunset behind my horizon line. And if I have any little touches, just make sure you wash your paintbrush so you don't drag that other color, like this color here. You want to wash that out. And here is my beautiful landscape, all done with markers, water, and crayon. I hope you had so much fun making your Grant Wood inspired landscapes, and I hope you guys enjoy this project. You do not have to do exactly what I did. You can do any kind of landscape, but remember, you want to add a horizon line. You want to add big things in the foreground so they're close to you, and then they get smaller in the middle ground and really small in the background, and you can create anything you want. I hope the patterns in Grant Wood's artwork inspired you and you had so much fun making your own landscape. Bye everybody.